Good afternoon to everyone, one and all. In my work at Indiana University, I have the opportunity on a regular basis to meet with any number of representatives from all sectors of our state's economy. And typically when I have these conversations, we talk a little bit about how Indiana University could become more directly engaged in some of their issues and their work. But invariably, when we start talking about the challenges that some of them are encountering, the conversation pretty quickly turns to workforce, and more specifically, talent. Bill, how can we do a better job of acquiring talent? How can we do a better job of retaining the talent that we have? And I'm sure that any number of you are wrestling with those same issues to one degree or another. And not surprisingly, the state chamber recently reported that there are at least 85,000 unfilled jobs in our state, unfilled because employers can't find skilled or qualified workers to fill those jobs. There's other data, other reports that suggest that the number is even greater in central Indiana alone. So the issue is a significant one, and the question, of course, is what are we doing about it? What are we doing about this issue of really ensuring that we have a workforce that is going to meet the needs of our state so that we can remain economically viable, vibrant, and prosperous? And I think as importantly, when you consider the current unemployment rate in Indiana, which is at historic lows, what does that mean for our fellow citizens who aren't finding their way in this economy? What can we be doing, what should we be doing to ensure that they have access to skills training, to education, so that they can indeed find gainful employment to support themselves and their families? So those are some of the issues I think that we're going to try to explore today. We've got a very distinguished panel to help us think through that a little bit, to share their thoughts, their experiences. I think what we're going to try to do is touch on what will be practices that we know are having impact, that are effective, that are making a difference right now. And hopefully you can benefit from that conversation. There'll be some take-home, I think, ideas or opportunities that you might be able to employ within your respective firms. So with that, let me begin by introducing our very distinguished panel. First up, I'd like to introduce Blair Milo. Blair is currently serving as the state of Indiana's first secretary for career connections and talent, and works to fill an estimated 1 million job openings over the next 10 years. She also serves on the governor's workforce cabinet, a body dedicated to shaping education and workforce training for a 21st century workforce. Secretary Milo served as the mayor of LaPorte after being first elected in 2011 and again re-elected in 2015. She is a veteran, having served as a surface warfare officer in the United States Navy. So please join me in welcoming Secretary Milo. Next up is Jason Kloth. Jason joined the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership in 2015 and serves as the founding president and CEO of Ascend Indiana, CICP's sixth initiative that focuses on talent and workforce development across Indiana. Ascend strengthens Indiana's economy by serving as an intermediary that bridges connectivity gaps between students, employers, higher education institutions, and policymakers. Prior to launching Ascend, Jason served for 4 years as deputy mayor under Mayor Greg Ballard, and before that held a variety of leadership positions at Teach for America, and actually began his career teaching 6th grade in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, where, not surprisingly, his peers elected him Teacher of the Year. So please join me in welcoming Jason Kloth. Next, I'd like to introduce Fred Payne. Fred joined the Indiana Department of Workforce Development in 2017 when he was appointed commissioner by Governor Eric Holcomb. Fred came to the DWD from Honda Manufacturing of Indiana, where he served as chief administrator with responsibilities over the business division at Honda, which included all support functions, including legal, IT, accounting, finance, planning, corporate affairs, facilities administration, inclusion, and diversity. And Fred was one of 3 executive leaders at Honda comprising the company operating committee, which is responsible for overall operations at Honda. Fred is an attorney by profession. He was in private practice, represented employers and employment law issues before federal and state courts, governmental and administrative agencies throughout the United States. Join me in welcoming Fred Payne. And next, I'd like to introduce Mike Langellier and welcome him to the stage. Mike, as many of you know, is the president and CEO of TechPoint, a nonprofit operating under the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership umbrella that serves as a tech ecosystem growth accelerator, delivering talent, venture capital, and promotion to Indiana companies, all of which fosters a connected and dynamic community. Mike began his career with leading financial software and services firms before co-founding his own company that developed a web-based personal finance tool that was acquired by Money Desktop in 2011. He subsequently joined TechPoint as the Vice President for Strategic Partnerships before being selected to lead TechPoint shortly thereafter. His leadership at TechPoint continues to distinguish the organization, bringing national and international recognition to our state as our tech sector continues to grow. So once again, please join me in welcoming our panel. Let me begin by perhaps clarifying a little bit. You know, when we talk about talent, when we talk about brain gain, there's also the issue of brain drain. And there seems to be a perception that somehow part of the challenge that we have going forward is that Indiana is hemorrhaging talent. We're losing a lot of our best and brightest. But the data doesn't necessarily confirm that in some respects. So I'm kind of curious as to what you all are finding in terms of our ability as a state to retain the talent that we have. So Mike, maybe I'll begin with you just from your experiencing on the tech side.
Sure. I remember coming into this role, that was one of the most common monikers was brain drain. And then coming into the role, and one of the things, as Bill said, our mission is to help make this place thrive by making this one of the strongest tech ecosystems in the country, and being that one of the most critical ingredients is talent. That's a core area of focus for us. And so we've spun up a suite of different programs and talent pipelines to be able to connect talent with great companies and job opportunities here and accelerate the growth of this talent pool and strengthen this community here. And so I came in with that perception, and then as we created these programs, I realized, you know what, the reality is oftentimes very different. I think you know this data better than I, but there are about 250,000 college students within a 7-hour drive of here. No, sorry, 70 miles of here. And so you talk about that quantity of people that are being educated here in some really great institutions. That is a high quantity of people, and naturally those people are going to end up in a lot of different places. But the data that we're seeing in particular through our extern program, which is a summer internship program where we are aggregating all of the internship opportunities among companies all around the region, and then we're also recruiting really high quality college talent from around the state, but the program's grown to attract talent from all around the country. What we find is really interesting. So when they finish the program, 75% say that they're likely to live and work here in Indiana after graduation. Now, what's stark is when we started the program, 17% said that they were when we started the program and students would come into the program, it was 17% said that they were likely. After the program, about 75%. So we would see a 50, 60 point swing in sentiment just because of their being here for the summer. Now that number has grown to 35, coming into the program, 35%. So the percentage has doubled of those that before they even step foot here for the internship program, because of the reputation of the city and its tech community and because of the extern program, they're already more likely to want to be here. And so we want to continue to see that close. But however, at the end, 75% say that they're likely to be here, and when offered a job, 80% accept. And this is some of the highest quality tech talent from all across the country. For 170 spots this summer, we had over 1,800 applicants. And they came from almost every state in the country, 43 home states, 120 different universities. So it's a very, very high quality talent pool that's coming in, and overwhelmingly when they finish, they want to come in. So actually what we experience, and you have stats on this too, is that it is not purely, there are two main things. One of them, I would say, there is a low level of awareness. When we engage college students, even those that grew up in Indiana, their level of awareness of the job opportunities that are here and the livability as a young person, where they might want to live and what they could do, that awareness is low. And what's shocking is that they could grow up in just on the outskirts of Indianapolis or somewhere else across the state, and their level of positive impression is about the same as someone who grew up outside the state. So I think we have a marketing challenge internally to the state, but we also have kind of a misperception that once given some information, once exposed, they do want to be here, and that begets the second challenge, which we need more early in career job opportunities to put them into.
Great. Let me ask Blair, I know that you and your colleagues have established talent regions, 21st century talent regions in a couple of regions of the state already. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of how that collaboration is working?
Sure, and thanks, Bill, so much for the opportunity to join the discussion and for all the group here that came together to think about, what could we be collectively doing together to address some different aspects of the talent pipelines. And there's a couple of ways that we've kind of organized the challenge in our minds of thinking around how do we attract talent and thinking about that as we measure it by population growth. How do we develop talent? And we specifically look at post-secondary education attainment levels and identifying with some of the goals that the Lumina Foundation has put together through a significant amount of research of identifying that around 60% of the jobs by 2025 are going to require some sort of a post-secondary credential. So there's considerable work that we have to do around being able to get our population connected up with some of those different levels of education attainment. And then also looking at talent connection, and we measure that by median household income and thinking of how are we moving people along the economic mobility spectrum. And so the idea behind 21st Century Talent Regions was to provide a vehicle for being able to capture some of that data and capture some of the work that goes into all of these different elements, because it doesn't live just in the education sector or just within industry or just within nonprofits or economic development. It's all of these different pieces coming together. And so with the designation, then we offer the opportunity for regions to earn this by building and implementing a plan to attract, develop, and connect talent with those three measures that I just talked about. And we ask that then there is representation amongst those groups from education, both K-12 and higher learning, from the business sector, from nonprofits, from local government, economic development, and workforce development. And then we work with these groups to be able to map out kind of who's all engaged in the work. That I don't know if any of you have had some of the experience that I had when I was mayor, and certainly that I continue to experience, of just knowing that there's a lot of good work going on in this space in many different capacities, but I always struggled to figure out who's doing what where and how does it all align. And so again, this process of being able to earn the designation provides a vehicle for capturing in a visual representation who's all engaged in the work, and then thinking how it aligns to those three different elements of growing our population, increasing our post-secondary education attainment levels, and increasing median household income. And so we have 2 regions thus far that have earned that designation, and that's up in the northeastern portion of the state. There's 11 counties that are a part of that group, where they have collectively built this plan across 11 counties. That as we think about some of those different pieces, some of what Mike just talked about of ensuring that students have awareness around some of these different opportunities, then it takes having all these partners collaborate to ensure that students are connecting up with the awareness, and then some mentoring opportunities, internships, job shadowings, which requires the businesses to be engaged in some of these opportunities as well, and to ensure that there are partners that are helping with those connection points all along the way. And by having those groups within Northeast Indiana, the second group is in southeastern area, that it's a collection of about 6 communities that are a part of a group called the ECHO Network. And they have all come together to, again, have consistent conversations with one another around how they can be supporting all the different aspects of this work, to have an organized continuum and to be able to see kind of who's playing what roles in all of these different aspects of the talent pipeline, so that we can ensure that we're addressing some of those pain points that Mike talked about of awareness, and ensuring that that the students feel connected to some of the different pieces, and even thinking about those statistics that Dave mentioned mentioned in the openings of where people don't feel necessarily connected to their community or to the system, that by having all of these partners work together, then it can create those opportunities for students and adults who are in the workforce to be better connected with awareness of opportunity and the skills that they're going to need to take advantage of them.
Great, thank you. Well, along those lines, in terms of partnerships, Fred, I know that in terms of establishing the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeships, I mean, it's really dependent upon maintaining strong relationships and partnerships with a variety of stakeholders. Can you talk a little bit about the focus of the office and where things are headed?
Okay, sure. First, I'll talk a little bit about the strong characteristics that make for a strong workforce development system, which is in part what both Mike and what Secretary Milo have both talked about. It's really, one is the engagement piece, engagement between employers, educators, and the community. Once upon a time, each one of those operated in silos, but now we're seeing a greater awareness of the necessity to really partner and to really have that type of engagement, which leads to us having the appropriate training and education for people who are coming throughout our education and our workforce pipeline. So that's the second characteristic, the appropriate training. The third is to review and reflect, to really look at what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and if we've not made enough people aware of the opportunities that are there, go back to the drawing board and figure out how we can make those opportunities available and aware. So I wanted to start off with those three characteristics, which really lead into the second characteristic, which is really the appropriate education and training. And that's where our Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship really falls into play. Back in 2018, Governor Holcomb, through executive order, created the state's first Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship. And with that office, our goal is to really help foster public-private partnerships to ensure that employers and the private industry and businesses are engaged with the government to make sure that we have a system that's really addressing the need of gaining, helping the students to gain experience while they learn things from the classroom, but they're really engaging in employers and getting some experiential training. One of the things that we've seen throughout the years is that sometimes employers are reluctant to have an established work-based learning or apprenticeship program because some programs may take 3 or 4 years before there's a credential. And with the rate of change today, some employers are saying I don't need to have a work-based learning program that's 18 months. So we want to make sure that we have something that fits our needs. So our Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship has about 6 different pathways for employers and students to engage in, all the way from a simple job shadow, which is really a student or someone going out to a company, really getting a feel of the place and really understanding what they do. That could be an hour or 2 hours worth of an employer's time. It doesn't cost the employer any capital or any cash, and what it costs the student is just a little bit of time, and they become aware of what's happening in a facility. All the way through the general internship programs, and we also have a state Earn and Learn program where our office works with an employer to develop a program that the student can gain the competencies that they need to fit that particular company or in that industry. So that's part of the spectrum, and it goes all the way up to a registered apprenticeship program. So the idea is to make sure that we are addressing and meeting employers exactly where they are in terms of getting interest and gaining students' participation. But we also want to make sure that we are giving this information to the influencers in those students' lives. So we know that our students have influencers all around them. Some are teachers, some are parents, some are friends, some are church members. The more that we have conversations and engagement with our community, that helps to drive the information that we provide to the students and the general awareness of what's available at these companies that will help them to get to their next level.
Great, thank you. Let me turn to Jason Kloth now. Jason, in terms of as we look at kind of a 21st century workforce and what is expected and demanded in terms of, again, Indiana remaining competitive and prosperous, what are you seeing in terms of, and what is Ascend doing in terms of those kinds of practices, policies, activities that are actually helping with regard to upskilling and preparing students for those kinds of opportunities going forward?
Yeah, so I'll just speak to what I think is happening at a macro level and the implications of it. So basically, demand in the labor market for people with higher levels of knowledge and skill is increasing at the most rapid rate in human history. So the demand curve is moving like this for more educated people, but the supply curve of people with that level of education has been pretty flat. Naturally, when demand outstrips supply, that drives up wages for that group of people. At the same time, the demand curve for less educated workers that pay middle wage jobs, like those that we would associate with manufacturing, the Rexnord jobs, the carrier jobs, we're losing those as a function of trade, automation, and the digitization of work. So that demand curve for those roles is going down, largely being replaced with hourly retail jobs, those sorts of types of employment, while the supply curve is really steady. And that's going to drive wages down for a group of people. And so as those curves run away from each other, you get income inequality. And so realistically, the only way to solve that problem is to increase the supply curve of more educated people with certain sets of knowledge and skills. And so the way that you do that is you increase not only access, but you ensure that people are concentrating in high demand fields. You ensure that they're persisting through college, and then you're helping them find a job here in Indiana when they complete. And so Ascend's working really across a variety of ways to address that. The first is through a software platform that we've built called the Ascend Network, which allows us to profile companies, teams, jobs, and internships. And then we break those jobs and internships down into discrete data, character traits, technical skill, and work style. So we have about 260 employers on the network so far. We're growing to thousands in the coming few years in our growth plan. And we have about 2,000 roles that are on it. Then on the supply side, we partner with higher education institutions like IU, like Ivy Tech, that's doing incredible work under Chris and Sue's leadership. We access student information, we meet with candidates, then we capture character traits, technical skill, and work style, and then we use an algorithm to match those individuals to opportunities. So last year we had about 4,300 applications, matched about 800 people so far. But there are some instances where we just don't produce enough people with the knowledge and skill required, so we have to have the ability to connect employers in higher education through a structured process to build more nurses when we don't have enough. We have to be able to build more drug substance operators for companies like Catalent. We have to be able to build pipelines of licensed clinical social workers to meet the need for the rising opioid addiction crisis. And so we have a consulting function that does that. And then we want to take what we learn and feed it back into public policy. So I think there are these macro level challenges that we need to address as a community through public policy and civic leadership. And then I think there are very tactical things that we need to address through the work that we're doing at Ascend or the work that Mike's doing at TechPoint.
Great, thank you. Well, you mentioned collaborating or partnering with higher education institutions. I represent one. I'm just curious, from the panel's perspective here, what are your experiences in working with higher education? I mean, has it been helpful? Has it been a challenge, difficult? I hear sometimes from some of our stakeholders that, it's kind of tough working with you guys sometimes. You're large, you're bureaucratic. What are your experiences, and what could we be doing better? What should we be doing better? Blair?
Sure, I'll kick off the response to that question. And I think that there's very positive relationships that are growing and opportunities that are taking place, and it just looks very different in different parts of the state as far as different types of industries that are engaging and what those partnerships can look like overall. I really give a ton of credit to our higher education partners that are trying to think more creatively and think about how we can be more nimble, thinking a little bit about some of the pieces that Mike talked about too, of the rapidness of the change of the different types of skills that are needed, that there are some great conversations that are happening with our higher learning partners of thinking through, how do we expedite some of the process for developing the skills that are needed and credentialing some of those pieces all along the way, which is that's an emerging space within the high tech area, as well as then higher learning, because of just the shorter lifespan of some of these different skills, particularly in the high tech area. and again speaks to the need for the continued conversation between our business partners and our education partners, be they higher ed or then K through 12, that then kind of that all those groups need to be in a similar conversation with one another, because we're trying to do a better job of blending the seams that may have existed in some of that learning continuum that students go past, so that then, where we've seen some of the problems for persistence have been at those breakpoints, so that then if somebody gets a high school diploma, then that's kind of where they stop persisting. Or if they start with 1 year of college, then maybe they don't persist past that first year. So how do we better blend those experiences amongst K-12, the higher learning partners, as well as industry? And that's where Fred's team at the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship is really critical for helping develop those programs. And I'm just out of curiosity, how many in the room here have heard about a policy called graduation pathways? So a pretty small portion of you, and yet this is going to be a significant shift, I think, for the learning experience for our students, particularly our high school students and those who will be coming through the system behind them, that for the graduating class of 2023, there is a requirement to have this fully implemented for our high schools, that then the current way that a student graduates from high school is that they participate in the core academic standards, and then they pass a standardized test that is applied for all students, no matter what career area it is that they're going into. We're moving now into a model that students will still participate in that academic component, but then instead of that singular standardized test that is applied to everyone, there are actually two other what we call buckets that the students will participate in. The first being that every student will participate in a work-based learning, service-based learning, or project-based learning experience of their choice, that based upon what kind of interest they have of industry areas and what's available to them in their particular districts. And then they will also take a post-secondary readiness assessment based on what career area it is that they want to go into. So if they are interested in going to the military, then it may be the ASVAB. If they're interested in skilled trades, then it may be an apprenticeship program, although we're hoping that the apprenticeship model can expand beyond some of the skilled trade areas that have been the legacy of where it's existed. If somebody's wanting to be a doctor or a lawyer, then that's going to require a 4-year college degree and then some. And so the post-secondary readiness assessment for that could be the SAT or the ACT. But it's going to be fitting for that individual. That policy is aimed at blending the experiences for the student all along that pipeline, so that then they're connecting in with the business, they're connecting in with some of those higher education components. And many of our schools are doing a tremendous job of this already with the support of higher learning institutions, who are doing a lot more with dual credit, with dual enrollment, and I think Ivy Tech has a huge shout out to them for the work that they're doing with many schools on providing these kinds of opportunities, so that many of our high school students are graduating with 1 or 2 years of college done already by the time they're getting their diploma, which leads to so many valuable benefits for that student and their families from a financial standpoint and a career awareness piece. But it is still in development, and it takes having our business community engage with our educators to ensure that we're developing those kinds of learning experiences for our students all across the different districts that they're in.
Jason?
Yeah, so I think something I've observed over time, back from our time in the mayor's office, is there are a lot of really well-intentioned people on both sides of the equation. Well-intentioned employers that have needs, well-intentioned higher education institutions that want to produce what is needed. That is, like, my experience has been that's been virtually universally true. Where the challenge lies is getting those groups together in a structured format to actually do it. So I'll give an example. Roche hires technicians away from labs and healthcare systems late in their career. They pay those people very high wages, and they do all kinds of works. They fix machines, they install machines. But that's a real challenge for them, because those technicians don't like to do basic installation, and they're late in their career at the top of the pay scale. So Roche wants to create a new role called the Planned Activities Specialist with certain kinds of knowledge and skill required. There has to be a mechanism then to go out and look at what higher education institutions provide degrees that are likely to align to that kind of opportunity at a company like Roche. Define that, try to understand who the right higher education partners are to engage, and then engage with them in a structured format where Roche is at the table, and in this case, the University of Indianapolis is at the table to say, how are we going to market, recruit, select, matriculate, what will people learn, who will teach them, how much will it cost, and then launch the program and build it out to the benefit of the student, the university, and the employer. What's missing is not, I think, good intention or the desire to make Indiana more competitive. I think what's been missing is a structure by which those groups can get together and rapidly build what it is that we need. And I think what we've seen is just tremendous interest, whether it be from Ivy Tech, the University of Southern Indiana, IUPUI, all across the board, people want to be good partners.
We experienced something different. Jason mentioned structure. I think that's a key part of it. If you think of, we're in a world now that whether you shop in store or online, if you shop in a store, let's take Target for example. You walk in there, you know what's on your list, what's on your shopping list, what you're looking for. There are signs on the aisles that say where to find that category of product, and then you can go and you can look on the shelf to find exactly what you want. In an e-commerce environment, you go to Amazon or something of the like, and you do a search, and you can very quickly hone in on that category of product that you want to buy. We're in a world of very precise marketplace search, both in store and online. But if you abstract away and you think about talent as a marketplace, which it is, it operates a lot more like a flea market, where you have lots of vendors that are all set up shop inside a general open kind of marketplace area, and you have lots of buyers that are entering into that market seeking those products, and those products in this case is talent. And the problem is you have employers, the buyers, that are of varying degrees of sophistication or actually our ability to articulate exactly what they want. And then you have many different suppliers that are supplying product, whatever kind of educational institution that they are, serving that up, but all different, also, but trying to compete on specific features of their program or specific features of their the experiences their students have embarked upon. It just makes for a much more, if you've ever been to a flea market, they're just noisy and complicated and just with tons of activity, right? We have 9 of the major educational institutions that are partners of ours. IU is a great one, WGU, Ivy Tech that I see all here. And from a relationship standpoint, from an intent standpoint, are terrific. And we do lots of great work together. The challenge is not an intent one, it's not a relationship one, it's a structural one. And the way that we've oriented our talent marketplace is just structurally flawed in a lot of ways. One, because of the nature of how it's kind of organized and how that marketplace is facilitated. It needs to be better structured, and that's the work that our programs are doing. The second is the way that it is timing. So any of you that have kids and you've taken your kids to a water park, and there's that one big fun attraction that all the kids love where there's a big bucket that fills up with water, and then it gets to a certain height and it dumps over. That's the way that we've organized our educational system, or the supply side of talent, and it's nobody's fault. It's just the way that we all set it up however long ago, where the bucket fills, and then come May it dumps over and it floods out to the whole world, and then you end up with this excess of supply in a finite amount of time. It just violates, and then you have employers that by contracts are trying to procure that talent on a just-in-time basis. So you have mass supply coupled with just-in-time demand, and those two are just not very compatible with each other. So I juxtapose that. I had the good fortune to about a month ago go on a trip to Switzerland, and it was specifically to participate in an institute to do a deep dive on the Swiss apprenticeship model, something that I didn't have a whole lot of prior familiarity with. It's a country, if you think about the EU akin to the United States, and think about Switzerland as akin in size to Indiana. Chris was on this trip with me as well. The Fairbanks Foundation helped to pull a group together to go participate in this. And we got a really intense look at kind of how they structure their system. The reality in Switzerland, is that they don't have, we have created this mindset in the US that in order to be successful, in order to have, somebody used the word before, and I think it might have been dignified jobs or dignified employment, in order to kind of have that self-respect that comes with good work, doing good work, that you have to immediately go from high school to college. And when you look at the data, and I feel when you look at the data in Switzerland, by contrast, they've said, no, we're going to create a dual education system. We'll have a portion that are ready to go directly to university that will do so. We have another path that are going to go kind of a work and learn vocational model. They're going to go to school and work at the same time. 65% of those that graduate from their equivalent of high school go do an apprenticeship. They start as an apprentice and they work over 3 years at the same time that they're going to school. And so there's a partnership with educational institutions while these people are working at the same time. So you say, well, that's just different. The U.S. is different. But when you actually look at the Indiana numbers, there are about 80,000, take a cohort of 80,000 high school students that are in the same age level, that are in high school in Indiana right now. You fast forward about 6 or 8 years from now, 65% of those will not either graduate high school, start college, or finish college within six years. We're actually looking at a very similar macro dynamic. We just don't have a dual education system here to be able to handle an integrated work and learn model between employers and our education system. And what I think what that creates is employers oftentimes do a disservice to our educational partners because all of the responsibility has been heaped upon our educational partners to say, hey, we want you to take every one of our kids, regardless of whether they're ready or not, you got to take them, and it's your job to get them done in 4 years, and it's your job to equip them with the theoretical knowledge that they need and the work experience that they need, so that they can both graduate with a degree which is out of your control because there's an authorizing body that dictates whether they qualify for a diploma, but also with sufficient work experience that they can land a job with the skills. There's simultaneously this acute demand for both high level of theoretical knowledge, but also tactical applicable skill at the same time. And that is a really hard recipe to execute in practice. And what I saw in seeing this other model is that we're just approaching it all wrong. We need a dual education system, and I'll speak for tech in particular, there is this perception that everybody has to have a college degree. Yes, you need high quality raw talent, but we're in the process of right now breaking down those key occupation groups. We worked on this together. These key occupation groups inside tech, and I guarantee that there are a good number of those that if you really scrutinized that job and then you worked backward and said, what do you really need to know? What do you really need to be able to do? That you could make a really strong case that that's a job that somebody early in career, maybe in the process of getting their degree, but not having graduated yet with a degree, that they could enter into an integrated, longer duration, work and learn type of experience like what Switzerland enables. And it would create just a more efficient labor market. Over in Switzerland, they have a sub 3% youth unemployment rate, which is just remarkable. And we got to meet and talk to some of those students and to see the level of competence and the level of pride that they have in the occupation that and their mastery of it is inspiring. And I wish that for our kids too.
Fred, does that model make sense for Indiana?
Well, there are quite a few things that are going on that mimic that to some respects. So the conversation about whether or not an individual needs a college degree or they don't, I think we've changed the dynamics of that conversation as of recent years. We're working to ensure that folks understand that children have a different pathway to get to where they want to go. Some are going to require a degree, some won't. And we're trying to get rid of that stigma that if you don't have a 4-year degree, then that you have something lesser than. And as Mike indicated, there are so many competencies within different job codes or occupations now that some may not require that degree. So the goal really is to really understand how learning is not episodic, it's lifelong, but then that each student has a different pathway, and we need to create opportunities to do that. And we're trying to do that with these partnerships with our educational providers, because I do think that they're now understanding a lot more that The 4-year degree may ultimately be what the student gets, but they may not get it in 4 years. They may be ready to have sort of a 6-month competency-based learning program. And that's one of the things that we're really trying to work toward. That's why our Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship is really trying to work more directly with employers and even the educational institutions to create these different pathways, because when you really look at it, we're going to need those 4-year degrees. We're going to need master's degrees. We're going to need PhDs. But we also need the person who's certified in welding. I mean, we're in this building right now. There's a lot of welding that took place in this building, and if it wasn't done sufficiently, I think we wouldn't want to sit in here. There are a lot of coding jobs that are out there now that don't require a 4-year degree, but those jobs are ever important. So we focused on trying to ensure that we are honing in onto those jobs and the training necessary to get individuals those jobs, which is why the governor put forth his next level agenda, and specifically next level jobs, to ensure that we've removed the financial barrier to individuals getting the training that they need. So for example, if someone wants to be a computer coder, but they don't have that type of training, and they say, well, I don't have the financial resources to do that. Well, our Workforce Ready Grant pays for them to have that training. But it doesn't just stop at that non-credit bearing certification. If that individual wants to go on to Ivy Tech or Vincennes, and they've identified a high wage, high demand job in some certification, they can really go through that Workforce Ready Grant program and have it paid for. So part of this discussion is really the structural piece. Some of that is financial, some of it is awareness, but I think overarching, it's really the dialogue about what is a good job, what is an honorable job, and that comes with understanding what a degree is and what a certification may be.
Blair, did you have a comment?
Yeah, if I could jump in as well, just kind of tying a couple of those pieces actually together, that I had the opportunity to travel to Switzerland as well a year before the group that went out there. And just an anecdote from that trip that I thought was very indicative of some of where our mindset is compared to where the Swiss mindset is, that we had a group that was out there. There was about, I don't know, maybe 18 or 20 of us. And many of the members of this group were employers, generally from the northern Indiana geography. And we were visiting at Swisscom, which is the largest telecommunications provider for Switzerland. And they are also the largest host of apprentices across their entire employer base. And they have a whole creative system that they have a marketplace of apprenticeships for all the different people that they have there. But so we had this group of employers that were meeting with some of the representatives there to understand more about their process, the system they have. And some of our employers said, you know, as markets change, the economy changes, and certainly then companies have to be able to address those different changes. How do you protect your budget for training and for the apprenticeship program to ensure that that doesn't get impacted by other pieces of the operational needs for your company? And it was just really fascinating to see the Swiss response, because the guys from Swisscom said, they're like, I don't understand the question. Like, why would we impact our training budget with any of the operational needs? Because we're not going to be able to meet our operating opportunities if we touch our training budget, because then we won't have access to the workers and the talent that we need to do whatever piece of the operations that we are going to do. So why would we ever change any of that? And it was just interesting to see kind of the light bulbs go off for many of our employers that were sitting there thinking, well, that's generally actually the first one to go for us when we have changes that happen across our business model. And so, well, maybe we need to think about this a little bit differently. And so that, I thought, was just an interesting indication of kind of how that system plays out for them, and some of the differences between kind of where Indiana is at versus where Switzerland may be with the two different kinds of systems.
Great, thank you. We're going to take questions from the audience here shortly. So as you have the note cards on your table, if you'd like to write down a question that we could ask the panel, we'll be collecting those shortly. Let me turn a bit, though. As we think about central Indiana, in some respects, it's kind of anomalous relative to the rest of the state, and we have a more diverse economy here in terms of being driven in large measure by tech, life biosciences, logistics, distribution. That's not the case in other regions around the state where the economy may be more dependent upon a primary source of activity. So I'm curious in terms of, again, as we look at what's a daunting task as we try to continue to train and upskill Hoosiers for jobs of the 21st century. I'm wondering if, just interested in comments in terms of what you're finding in some of those regions that maybe are a little bit more challenged in terms of diversity of economic base and how we're working or succeeding or not in terms of preparing citizens of those regions for new job opportunities.
So I think part of that question belies where we start with our cycle, our pipeline. Let's talk about our high school graduation rate with that. There are communities around the state that have lower high school graduation rates than other parts of the state. And I don't know, how many of you have heard of the Jobs for America's Graduates program, a JAG program? Okay, so several of you. And that program essentially is sort of a high school dropout prevention program. There are students who are on the verge of, on their way to having all the indicators that they will drop out of high school. And then this program comes in and it takes them to the finish line. So our JAG program has a 96% graduation rate as of last year, the last class, 96% graduation rate. And those students amassed somewhere close to $35 million in educational training and scholarships. So parts of our state where we have low graduation rates, we end up seeing generational poverty. And when individuals don't graduate from high school, there's a 40% they're 40% more likely to never enter into the workforce. So that's part of the challenge in certain parts of our state if we never get our students into the workforce. So the things that we're specifically doing around the state to ensure that folks at least get to that finish line so that they can participate is really focusing on those areas where there's a low high school graduation rate. But with the employers in those areas, to make sure we're stimulating them and making sure that they have the resources they need to fill the jobs that may be available, but they don't necessarily have the trained people for them, is to ensure that we're providing some training dollars and resources for them as well, which is where our employer training grant program comes into play. And it provides for employers to get $5,000 per employee to hire, train, or retrain employees, up to $50,000 per employer. And we see different parts of the state have different challenges. We know in northern Indiana, where we have the RV industry, usually your discretionary income is kind of the first thing that you start saving, you pull back on. That area of the state, typically folks say when you start seeing there being a dip in RV sales, you may see a dip in the economy because discretionary spending is stopping. You see it in the ATV industry. So we look there, but we look at a variety of other places too. So the goal is really to, again, to directly answer your question, to really help the pipeline in getting people into the workforce, but then also to empower employers with resources that they need to help get people to the level that they need to have the training for their jobs.
I think that I was born and grew up in one of those rural places, and I think it's a balance because you want to empower the employers there to nurture the workforce that they need there in that locality. But the reality that urbanization is a megatrend that's impacting every geography worldwide is a reality. And so I think we have to stop short of trying to control or restrain the young people that are growing up in those localities if they desire to pursue something else as well. Thus why I think we have to boost the capabilities of our state's career exploration capabilities, or whether you call it career services, career exploration, whatever it is. The reality of it is the ratio is 600 to 1, the number of students to career service providers at the K-12 level. That's not, either the model has to change or the ratio has to change. Because the reality of it is if you grew up in one of those rural areas, it's going to be really difficult for you to be exposed naturally to the full breadth of industries and job opportunities that might resonate with you in the case where the job opportunities that are in closest proximity to you don't. And we need to make sure that we're equipping the young people, regardless of where they're growing up geographically, with the career exploration mechanisms so that they can find what they want to do next, regardless of whether it's in their geography or not.
Okay. Blair, jump in.
And I brought some information that just came out with the Commission for Higher Education's equity report that was released. I think it was either earlier this week or last week, that they actually look into, what the breakdown is across some of the different pieces. You mentioned geography. We look at socioeconomic status, gender, race, and ethnicity. And some highlights that I think would be interesting for this group to just be able to connect up with it. Learners are more diverse, and so they've identified that nearly 10,000 more students graduated high school in 2017 than in 2007, and virtually all of the growth was among minority students. Socioeconomic status, almost a third of all high school graduates were from low-income households in 2017. From gender, Indiana's college going rate dropped a percentage point from the previous year to 63%. The amount of the state decrease can be almost entirely attributed to a decrease in men's college going rates. And from a geography standpoint, nearly a quarter of all high school graduates in 2017 were rural students. So over half, or 59% of rural graduates went to college within 1 year, but that's lower than the state average of 63%. So that gives you an understanding about some of that geographic disparity that we're seeing there. And so it's important to have, I think, some awareness around what the data is showing us of those trends across equity to ensure that we're tailoring our programs to ensure that we're recognizing that not everybody comes to these opportunities from the same place.
Great. We've got about 10 minutes. I've got some good questions here, so maybe we can do this in kind of lightning round fashion. The first one is, Indiana Core 40 requires 6 credits of foreign language, yet no coding. The most high skill role requires software, basically, why isn't coding incorporated into some of our requirements at this point?
Good question.
Well, I can share that. I mean, there is a requirement now for computer science to take place in all of our schools, and so the reasoning behind that is not to just develop a whole bunch of computer scientists, although that's certainly a career area, industry area that offers tremendous opportunity, but for anybody in whatever field that they're going to be participating in, that we know that technology plays a huge role, whether it's manufacturing or agriculture, health and life sciences, that there's tech in all of those areas. The other piece that comes with computer science is then some of those critical thinking skills, the problem-solving pieces that that kind of a curriculum helps develop. So there is a computer science requirement. The STEM Council developed a plan to graduate those requirements into the school, so it's not just all of a sudden we have this massive requirement that we place on all of our schools and as a part of this process. So there is a plan to step up that increase that I think goes through 2025 to ensure that all of our schools will have those kinds of learning opportunities available.
Jason?
Yeah, the only thing I would just add to that is we knew that this was going to be a need for a very, very long period of time. This was not something that snuck up on us overnight. And so I commend the state for putting computer science into the curriculum at the K-12 level. But I do think we need to acknowledge that the economy is rapidly changing, as I alluded to earlier. And I think you're starting to see a new trend of skills beyond coding that are going to be required just as basic functions in good-paying jobs. A lot of these are digital skills, basic things like the ability to use Microsoft Office, but increasingly things like data analytics. We're going to see a major trend towards machine learning, artificial intelligence. You're experiencing it today when you type in your Gmail and it finishes your sentence for you, using those types of tools that are coming increasingly commercially available. So one question I have is how is the public policy system that we built going to be more responsive, more rapidly to the changing needs in our economy, so that we don't spend the time that we spent trying to figure out whether computer science was a valuable skill for high school students, and that we can, respond more rapidly to these future needs.
Because what happened, political framework, the policy framework, we made significant strides forward in just the last couple years. The biggest challenge right now is teachers to teach it. And that only gets worse when the problem gets more acute, per what Jason talked about, because when you end up with a huge disparity between supply and demand, those that are practitioners in the field and have the skills to be able to teach it, the opportunity cost of them going to teach it from a wage perspective becomes significant. And so the ability then you have to say, well, do we have to create a mechanism in order to get professionals who are also highly sought after by industry for the work to go teach it? And then how do you cross that bridge? Or do you teach teachers how to code who are already pulled in a million directions and are already strapped for resources? It just becomes a really hard challenge to solve, even when you have the political will in place.
The labor market breaks down in this very way in all kinds of professions. It breaks down in nursing. When nurses, it's far more lucrative to be a nurse than to teach nurses, and so we don't have enough nurses. It breaks down in licensed clinical social workers, where to treat somebody with opioid addiction requires a bachelor's, a master's, a 2,000-hour practicum. And so I think it really is incumbent on our public policy system becoming more nimble, more responsive to the needs that exist in the labor market.
Yeah, I just want to add that, as you mentioned, the lightning round's going. But over the past couple of years, which is one of the reasons why the governor's workforce cabinet was created, to help to have the speed of decision making, removing our state workforce innovation council, which was about 40-something members large, shrinking that, and having the policy-making piece as a central component of that workforce cabinet, and having educators and businesses at the table so that they can respond to that a little
more
faster.
agility. Yeah. Well, let me shift gears, and this is, I think, an important question as well. It's basically, what are we doing to provide employment opportunities for ex-offenders, particularly first-time offenders, those with felony records, as we talk about breaking the cycle of poverty, intergenerational kind of considerations. Can we talk about that briefly?
Sure. There are a few programs that we've had out for a while that have tried to bridge the gap between when a person leaves prison and when they're out into the employment world and they're trying to find a job. We had a program called HIRE, Hoosiers Initiative for Reentry, that was run by the Department of Workforce Development. And it connected ex-offenders to jobs. And they've connected, at the time, a little bit over 13,000 employees to jobs, ex-offenders to jobs. So we did an analysis with the governor's workforce cabinet late last year. And what we found was that if we move the training and the resources to getting those offenders some type of credential prior to release and connecting them to a job pre-release, then we have a better recidivism rate, and then they're able to leave prison with jobs that have a livable wage. So we moved that function from outside of the prison system to the Department of Correction in January of this past year. And the goal is to ensure that we're working with employers to end up getting those individuals' credentials before they leave prison. The Department of Correction has had programs for quite some time where they're working with institutions like Ivy Tech and other employers to get individuals training on CNC machining, welding, and things like that to make sure that they have the credentials necessary before they leave prison.
Great. Let me close with one last question here, which I think is important. Basically, is there a specific call to action here? And more, I guess, even more pointed is, are there things that this audience can do in terms of volunteering their time, their efforts, their resources to contribute to the issues at hand? So I guess I'd be interested in your reaction to that question briefly as we close. So Blair, I'll start with you.
Well, to the extent that you can provide opportunities for students to do some sort of work-based learning, whether it's to participate in a job shadow, internship, thank you to everyone who is already a part of some of the mentoring pieces that those are huge opportunities for the students to gain that not only awareness around what the different type of job opportunities are, but to feel connected to a community within that business and industry area, and then they're much more inclined to then want to continue to persist in that area. So that helps address some of our retention rates, grows all of the numbers that we look at, and then provides opportunity for that student to feel then the dignity of work.
Jason?
I would, if you're an employer and you have early in career jobs or internships, email me, jason.kloth@ascendindiana.com. We'll get you on the network and help get students connected to those opportunities.
Fred?
Well, I think it's that one word engagement that I started off with when I talked about the characteristics. The engagement could be mentoring, the engagement could be just getting involved in any way that you can with really sitting on a panel or sitting on an advisory committee, because it's through that engagement that we learn a lot of things that we need to do, things that we may not be doing well. So I think your participation, the call to action to you, I would just ask that you get engaged if you're not already engaged.
And Mike?
I would say intentionality on two fronts. One of them is about really investigating the jobs that are part of your workforce. For those of you that are managers or business owners, business leaders, evaluating them from two different respects. Which of these jobs could you create a ladder? Starts with early in career opportunities, and not just concentrating on that, trying to find a unicorn, 5 to 7, 9+ years of experience, but how do you create career ladders and as a result create more capacity for early in career job opportunities? So create capacity, that's one. And then the second is really investigating, and these go together, investigating the job opportunities that you are posting and publishing. We're in an era of what's the word I'm looking for? It's not diploma escalation, but it's degree inflation, where employers are constantly kind of upping the bar as it relates to what kind of degrees, credentials, et cetera, are needed for a particular job. We've got to kind of steady ourselves to cut against that and really hone in on what's it really required to do this job, and making sure that you're targeting the search appropriately. And then if any of you are looking for if as a result of this, your workforce calls for tech-skilled talent, or if you are part of a tech company or highly tech-enabled company, please seek me out as well. It's mike@techpoint.org, because we are recruiting our class of 2020 externs that will be interns and new grads that we'd love to place in your companies.
Well, thank you one and all. That concludes the panel presentation. Please join me in thanking our panelists here today.